Eventually, my grandmother and grandfather, August and Bertha, moved out to Huntington, not only for the summer, but they moved there steadily. And in the meantime, my grandmother developed cancer.
Mm.
And when she was very ill, my mother decided she wanted to come out and take care of her mother. My mother and father were married in that house. My mother loved that house, and that's where she wanted to be married. So my mother and father, who eventually my father too, uh, now this was in a snowstorm on March the 7th, and it was a very bad snowstorm. Since my mother wanted to be married at this house and not in a church, the minister and his wife came to the house to marry them. When they got to the house, as I said, they came in a horse and sleigh. And when they got to the house, it was dumped over. The sleigh was dumped over into a snowbank, and that's where the minister and his wife ended up. So they went and married my mother and father anyway.
Wow.
And so the most interesting thing, I think, is that same day, that same March 7th, in the same snowstorm, Harold was born.
That's
And
amazing.
I always said my mother and father got married so they would have me, that Harold and I would be together. I'm sure God had my life planned out for me.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I really feel that.
Uh-huh.
And they were married in 1920. I
Okay.
was born in 1921.
Okay. Okay.
10 months later. We always joked about that.
Yeah, you were the honeymoon baby.
That's right. They went to get wet with each other for 13 years. I
Wow.
mean, knew each other all those years. They met as teenagers. And but I guess they must have fallen in love before that.
Yeah.
But they, my mother and father didn't marry as quickly as my aunt and uncle because my father was taking care of his parents.
Mm.
He
Okay.
was he was working and he had to take care of his parents. You know, in those days there was no social security or anything like that.
Right.
And that grandfather Horn became ill, and so my father, who was grown up by that time, was taking care of his parents,
Ah,
you know,
okay.
financially. My father was an electrician.
Oh, okay. Did he have his own business or did he work for a
He,
group?
he did eventually have his own business.
Wow.
But then when they finally were steadily in Huntington, they started the South Huntington Water District, and he became the first superintendent of that. So most of his life, he was with the water company. Uh, he was, the running this water where people needed water, of course. so, so that's what he worked in. So that was not affected by the war because people still needed water. You still had to have water companies. Uh, uh, but my dad always could have some gas because he had to get down to the water company, the waterworks as we called it. He had to get down there and start the pumps and stop them. Things were not just automatic back then. Uh, if I can remember as a child, um, if the fire siren would blow, he always wanted to know exactly where the fire was. If it was in his district, he would go immediately down to the waterworks and get the pumps going back so that there'd be plenty of water to put out this fire. I can remember as a kid, the fire siren would ring, and as that went off, he would run to a telephone in the house, and he would say, "Ted Horn." That was his name, Teddy Horn. My name was Horn. "Ted Horn, where is it?" And I can remember him saying that. And the fire department would then tell him where this fire was. Now, if it was in his district, he would immediately just scoot off and make sure the pumps were going, that the water pressure was up to be able to end this fire. So you see, things were not the same then. He was the first superintendent, and he was stayed there until he retired. So he really started that district as being the first superintendent. It was a municipal water district. It
Okay.
was not part of the town, which I believe it is still until this day. So it's a separate entity in Huntington. My mother's cousin took over the business.
Okay.
Um, uh, William Bader, Bader,
Hmm.
went into the business with his uncle, who was my grandfather.
Okay.
And he took over the business after that. My father was never in the business.
Okay. And so he went back and forth between Huntington and did you say where they had the upholstery business? Was it in Queens?
Yes, because I was born in Astoria, which is Queens.
Okay.
Um, I have a, f- I had a f- brother 5 years later who was born in Huntington. Yeah, of course, I was born at home, and so was my brother. You didn't go to a hospital in those days to have babies. Now, my father was very musical. He played the violin, he played the cornet. Uh, he was leader of the band locally. Uh, Now, my brother was very musically inclined. He, uh, in high school and all, he was tops in everything musically. Uh, with the music teacher in high school, uh, worked at a music camp in the summer, and he took my brother along as his assistant. But when but he was my brother was very musically inclined. It would be funny when we were growing up. He would do things like we'd be uh, we'd be having dinner, and he'd take a spoon or a fork or something and tap a glass. That's a B major, sir. That's a C major, or this is a so and so. He had perfect pitch. He could tell you. I mean, something he would hit that, and he'd tell you what that was. Me, I had no music talent whatsoever. I don't know, a ukulele, not really, really not play it. My father taught me how to do things, and I guess he would not really read the music, but he would write out the not well as music, and he'd put uh, s- uh, oh, I forget how what he did anyway, so that I know how many times to strum it and so forth. But I was not a musician at all. But my brother really was. When he finished high school, he volunteered immediately for the Navy. See, this we're in wartime now with my brother. Uh, he volunteered to go into the Navy. And for some reason, he was a bugler right away because I guess he could play cornet and all before. And so they uh, had him as a bugler. And then he must have done, I don't know what he did, but then they had him go to the Naval School of Music in Washington, D.C. So he spent a year there of his enlistment going to school. And when he was finished with that, when he got onto a ship, he was always in the band along with his other duties. I mean, as a matter of fact, when they signed the peace treaty with Japan, was on the name of the ship. Oh dear, I know it so well. Anyway, he was in the band at that time when they were signing the peace treaty. But he was always a musician. He got married while he was in the service, and I don't think his wife appreciated musicians. So he got a job at with one of the airplane factories. So he did well there with with the airplane factories. A little bit, but not the way he should have really, because he really was good. My father was, I said, and his father, my grandfather Horn. This was the times when um, uh, movies were first coming into being, and my grandfather played the piano for the silent movies. I imagine he finally got into it as a profession. But at first, I think because they'd only have it in the evening, it would only be. And my father, my grandfather was into this music with the theaters, and there was no talkies then, of course. It was they, so during the silent movies, they played a would always play. But then he must have taken. Oh, he did take lessons when he was about 7 years old, I think. He had. Do you ever see the little violin that uh, Judy Ann has hanging? She has it usually. She had it. She changes a little on the wall. A little violin. That was my father's when he was a little child. He had the small violin, and he played. So he was born a musician, but it didn't come to me. My mother's sister did that. I don't think she played by ear, as I used to say. My mother could read music, and of course my father did, and his father must have too. I don't really. I wasn't around then.
Did Harold have siblings?
Yes, he had one sister.
And he was the oldest?
No, he was the
Oh, he
youngest.
was the youngest. Okay.
Yes, his sister was 5 years older than him.
Ah, that's interesting. 5 years. You had a younger brother 5 years younger. He had an older
Yeah,
sister 5 years older. Huh.
and it's 5 years between Judy and Wendy.
Huh.
And well, Jim worked for an insurance company, and so he liked. And Violet worked for the library there. She worked in the library, which she enjoyed very much because the boys were all they were gone. I mean, there was so she got a job in the library, which she liked, and he was yes there in Williston Park. That's where they lived. Yeah, in Nassau County instead of Suffolk County. That doesn't mean anything either. Okay.